Fair Fight and our fellow plaintiffs have been clear in our goals from day one to ensure that all eligible Georgians, including new Americans, are able to participate in our democracy without obstacles, as is their fundamental right. We're confident in our case and are proud to have given Georgia voters their day in court. Through this lawsuit, we have challenged the unacceptable suppression of eligible Georgia voters, raised awareness, and focused on the experiences of voters and would-be voters. Amid the backdrop of this critical trial, and as we celebrate the historic voter turnout seen in the primary, while also gearing up for more record-breaking turnout in November, we must also recognize, learn from, and educate Georgians on the obstacles that voters continue to face when attempting to register to vote, stay registered to vote, cast a ballot, and have that ballot counted. Those issues persist today. The May 24th primary saw several significant statewide issues stemming directly from the failed leadership of the Secretary of State in overseeing election administration. From voters receiving incorrect information on their assigned precinct, to multiple statewide malfunctions of ENET, to election day technical issues that resulted in delays at the polls, the Secretary of State failed to ensure that all Georgia voters received accurate and timely information on how to make their voices heard. Instead of responding to these myriad needs, Secretary Raffensperger has spent this election cycle patting himself on the back for the tireless work of local elections administrators and organizers across the state. He has continued to misstate the remedies sought in this case for new Americans, and has continued to advocate that Georgia pass an unnecessary and redundant amendment to restrict voting in the state to citizens, which is already Georgia law. We're proud of the work done by grassroots organizations over the years that has led to the historic turnout we've seen in the last couple years, but our work will continue to be an uphill battle if the Secretary of State's office refuses to fulfill their basic duties. At the end of the day, this case has put real voters at the center of the conversation about voting rights in Georgia. And that's why we're here this evening, to amplify the voices of Georgians across the state who have been burdened by the state's elections practices. I'm pleased to now turn the mic over to Allegra Lawrence-Hardy to share some updates on the case, and she will also be able to take a few questions once speakers have finished with their remarks.
Thank you so much, Dakota, and thank you all for joining us on this very warm evening. We so appreciate your being here. I am Allegra Lawrence-Hardy, and as Dakota said, I have the privilege of being the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the Fair Fight Action versus Raffensperger litigation. As always, our entire trial team joins me here. Is proud to represent the plaintiffs in this case, Fair Fight Action, Karen Action, Baconton Missionary Baptist Church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the 6th Episcopal District of the A.M.E. Church, and Virginia Highland Church. And we are so grateful that some of our faith leaders have joined us this evening. You'll hear from them in just a moment. Some of you who are here tonight will recall when we're here at the start of this trial, now more than 2 months ago. The seasons have changed, and certainly so has the temperature, but we are still here, having presented our case, which, as you can see from our poster here, included the testimony of 49 witnesses, including more than 24 voters and would-be voters. In the next few days, we expect that defendants will conclude their portion of the case after calling the 6 witnesses that they have indicated will appear for their defense. I know that there have been no cameras in the courtroom, and so many of you have not been able to hear from the people who are most important in this case, the people who we have kept centered in this case, and that is the voters and would-be voters of Georgia, the courageous citizens who have joined us in the courtroom and in this case, and some of whom who are here today. So without further ado, I'd like you to have the opportunity to hear from just a few of them. and to remember that they represent so many other Georgians across the state whose constitutional rights have been burdened. We'll start with Cam Ashling.
Hello, my name is Cam Ashling. I am a finance professional, co-founder of the Georgia chapter of the Asian American Action Fund, a Fulton County resident, and as an active member of the Atlanta's Asian American Pacific Islander, also known as AAPI community, and a native Vietnamese speaker, I know the difficulties that many Asian voters face when trying to vote because of the spacing and sequencing of their names. For example, Vietnamese names are quite unique. There may be 2 last names with no hyphen. You can also have a middle name or no middle name. You can also have 2 first names. That is why Georgia's exact match policy creates significant obstacle for Vietnamese Americans and Asian American voters in the state of Georgia. In 2018, I had the opportunity to meet Ms. Tran, an 80-year-old Vietnamese immigrant, while canvassing her neighborhood in Norcross. Ms. Tran, who did not appear to speak English, expressed to me she was interested in voting in the 2018 general election. When I checked her My Voter page, I discovered that she needed to prove her citizenship to complete her registration, and she was also incorrectly listed as a man. After helping Ms. Tran locate her naturalization documents, I drove her to the Gwinnett County Election Board office, and after spending about half a day with Ms. Tran, helping her to find her naturalization paper, traveling to the local elections, translating the conversation with Ms. Tran and the election official to correct her citizenship status, to prove that she was a U.S. citizen and can vote, and to change the gender listed in the voter roll. She was then allowed to vote. If it weren't for my assistant and an extraordinary amount of time and effort, I believe Ms. Tran would not have been able to cast her vote. You know, it's frustrating to see members of the AAPI community encounter so many obstacles when exercising their fundamental right to vote and to be disenfranchised simply because their names do not always conform to convention used in the United States. Sadly, Ms. Tran is not with us to tell her story in court. I was proud to be able to honor her legacy as I share her story in court and here with you today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aaron Karp. I am a husband, a father, a web developer, and a resident of DeKalb County. I believe that voting is the bedrock right of all citizens of the United States. It is the way that we direct how our city, our state, and our country will proceed. And it is because of that central importance that I was honored to participate in this litigation. Ahead of the June 2020 primary election, kind of at the height of the beginning of COVID, I requested an absentee ballot, and I did receive that, and immediately put it somewhere safe so that I would remember where it was. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I then forgot where it was. I went to my polling place with the hope of voting in person. I had a similar experience some years before when I lived in Fulton County. And in that instance, I was able to just sign an affidavit affirming that I had or would immediately destroy the absentee ballot, and then proceeded to vote via machine as it normally would. In this case, when I explained the situation to the poll workers at my polling place, they seemed baffled and were unable to find information about how to proceed with this situation. They consulted with a manager. Eventually, they found an affidavit similar to the one that I'd signed in Fulton, I signed that, and after multiple attempts to call the DeKalb registrar for assistance, they decided the appropriate course of action was to have me vote by provisional ballot. I did so. I sealed the envelope, and upon returning it to the poll manager who had been working with me, he said that he was not sure whether it would count or not. As I think anyone in my shoes would, I left that experience feeling disheartened and certainly unsure as to whether my vote was going to count. And that is why I have participated here. As I said, I feel so strongly about the importance of voting that I needed to make this story known. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gary Ratner, and I've lived in Fulton County, Georgia for over 35 years. I'm a retired attorney. I've dabbled in graphic design in my retirement. To me, the right to vote is non-negotiable. That's why for over a decade, I've volunteered my time to help fellow Georgians vote by phone banking, staffing voter hotlines, and serving as a poll watcher on election days. On election day in November 2018, I served as a statewide poll watcher, and I covered Sumter and Dougherty counties. I witnessed nearly 24 voters who were turned away or encountered obstacles when trying to vote. For example, I recall at least 6 voters who were initially turned away after being told they could not be found on the list of eligible voters. When I spoke to these voters outside the polling place and learned that their names had hyphens or apostrophes, I encouraged them to go back in to ask to have their names searched again in a different way so that their record could be located. It was a relief to see those voters exit the polls a second time, happy and proud to have cast their vote. But it was also troubling to consider how many other voters may have been wrongly turned away because of how their name appeared or did not appear on the list of eligible voters. While I am proud that I was able to help the voters that I spoke to, I do not believe it should require the assistance of a lawyer to cast your vote. The right to vote is fundamental. It is vital to our democracy, and that is why it's important to me to be here today with members of my community who are equally committed to the fight for voting rights. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Boyd. I'm a resident of DeKalb County, and I've worked in the real estate field for over 25 years. The right to vote is very important to myself and my family, and I registered to vote when I was 18 years old and have voted in almost every election since then. I've canvassed neighborhoods, and I worked the voter assistance hotline, and my mother even shares this commitment with me. She has been a poll worker in Florida for several elections. And during the 2018 general election, I was assigned as a poll watcher to a precinct in Clayton County. And I was there from before the time that the doors opened until after the polls closed. And I was just so shocked and upset to see how many people were turned away without even being able to cast a provisional ballot. And one of the worst things that I saw was so many people who were told they had to leave that precinct to go to Fulton County to vote, even though they were residents of Clayton County. At one point, I saw a young Asian male who tried to use his passport as identification, but he was told he couldn't vote until he left and came back with a photocopy of the passport that he could leave with the poll workers. And I observed so many people who were told their names weren't on the voter rolls, even though they had voted before, they hadn't moved or in any other way altered their voter registration. And it was so discouraging to me. I know it had to be discouraging and disheartening to them. But in spite of all of the numerous obstacles that are imposed on the right to vote, I'll continue to serve and to advocate for voting. My goal is serving is to ensure that the rights for all eligible voters are to be able to cast their vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to thank all of the voters and would-be voters who have joined us today and in trial. And I do want to note that some of the folks here we heard in the trial and they're part of the record, some of them are coming to you for the first time here today. So it's so important for us, as said earlier, to witness their stories. I now am just going to take a moment to bring you the incredible faith leaders who are with us today. When we talk about the record turnout in Georgia, we know we have these community leaders to thank for all of their incredible grassroots work. And I'm sure that they each would thank the incredible congregations and all the numerous volunteers who put in countless hours to support voters across Georgia. We will start with Reverend Vaughn.
Good evening. I'm Reverend Dr. John Vaughn. I am the executive pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Ebenezer is a spiritual home for social justice and has a long-standing tradition of ensuring our congregation and community have a voice by fighting for the fundamental right to vote. This tradition began in 1935 when Martin Luther King Sr. spearheaded a voting rights campaign here in Atlanta. The tradition carried forward by our pastoral leadership, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and our membership, including former Congressman John Lewis. As explained by the Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, our senior pastor of Ebenezer, during his testimony in this case, Ebenezer believes civic participation is part of what it means to be a Christian. That is why I'm honored to stand here today beside such honorable community and faith-based organizations as we continue to fight for voting rights through this historic lawsuit. I have the privilege of telling you about one of those individuals who testified in our case, Miss Brundage. Unfortunately, Miss Brundage is not able to be here today, but she resembles many members of Ebenezer, our congregation, and she's also a strong woman, mother, and grandmother. Prior to November 2018, the general election, Ms. Brundage requested an absentee ballot. Ms. Brundage had never voted absentee, but she planned to do so in the 2018 election because she wasn't sure whether she would have transportation to the polls. Her absentee ballot never arrived, so she was forced to take the residential shuttle from her senior living facility to the polls. At the polls, Ms. Brundage was informed that she could not vote because she did not have her absentee ballot. While Ms. Brundage continued to wait at her polling place in hopes of speaking to someone who could resolve her issue and allow her to vote, she eventually had to leave without voting because she knew if she had waited any longer, the shuttle she took to the polling place would have left her behind. Because she was not able to cancel her unvoted absentee ballot and vote in person, she was disenfranchised. We are grateful to Ms. Brundage for sharing her experience with the court, and we are hopeful that her testimony and the testimony of others in this case will lead to meaningful change for all of Georgia's voters. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Matt Laney. I'm the pastor of Virginia Highland Church. We are a gospel-based, justice-doing, LGBTQIA affirming, anti-racist, inclusive community of faith here in the great city of Atlanta. And voting is important to us. We have an entire ministry dedicated to voter information, education, registration, voting rights, because we believe that every vote is a prayer for the world that God has in mind, the world that God dreams of. Unfortunately, too many Georgians still face an obstacle course when it comes to voting in Georgia, which frustrates their God-given ability to express their hopes and dreams, their God-given voice. For example, Dr. Del Rio, one of the witnesses who testified in our trial, has also been on the front lines of the pandemic. The day after becoming a U.S. citizen, Dr. Del Rio registered to vote, and he successfully voted in several elections. Election day in 2018, however, was different. Dr. Del Rio went to his regular polling place, presented his ID, and was told that he could not vote because his ID did not exactly match his voter registration. Dr. Del Rio's ID listed his last name as one word because DDS does not allow individuals to have a space between their name. His My Voter page, on the other hand, listed his name as two words, the exact same spelling, but the difference of a single space almost led to him not being able to vote. While Dr. Del Rio was able to advocate for himself, he had the time, he had the doggedness to make sure his right to vote was secured, we know that too many other voters are turned away. In the face of these and other obstacles, Virginia Highland Church has expanded our efforts and our voting rights ministry, and we will continue to do our part in the fight to ensure that every eligible Georgia citizen is able to register and cast their vote to express their God-given voice and hopes for our state and nation. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Reginald Jackson, Bishop of the 6th District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which encompasses the state of Georgia with more than 500 churches. In 2016, I was assigned to the 6th District here in Georgia, and I was concerned because of the turnout of African Americans and people of color, and even more because Georgia has a notorious history for voter suppression. And we organized what we called Operation Voter Turnout, which focused on registration, information, mobilization, and organization to make sure that we generated the greatest turnout of African American voters and people of color. And I was very much aware that many of our congregants and others across the state of Georgia who looked like me had difficulty with obstacles, which made it more difficult for them to vote. And we were determined that we would do all that we could to try to tear down those obstacles and to make voting easier. And so it is that as we looked at the landscape, we became even more concerned because while we did our part, obstacles still remain. Tonight, I want to lift up just as one example, Miss Brenda Lee, who happens to be here tonight. Miss Lee is dedicated and determined to have her voice heard and exercise her power, which is embedded in her right to vote. But as we approach November, she was concerned because of COVID-19 and also because she is vision impaired. And so with those concerns, she decided to vote by absentee ballot. With assistance of her grandson, she applied for an absentee ballot. And she waited for that ballot to come. Again, with assistance of her grandson, she went to the My Voter page. And she was amazed as her grandson Googled her address to discover that the address for her was wrong. As you might imagine, there are a lot of folk, not only in Georgia, but across the nation, with the last name Lee. And so when they looked up, there was another family who lived at that address, whose name also happened to be Lee. But Brenda Lee had never lived at that address. She tried to contact officials in DeKalb County where she lives. She tried several times, was put on hold for 20 to 30 minutes, but she kept on trying until finally she reached somebody. And when she reached somebody in DeKalb County, they informed her that a human error had been made. And that's why she had difficulty getting her absentee ballot. That is not an uncommon occurrence to Blacks and people of color across this state. In fact, it happens so often that you can't call it coincidence. And so it was that she continued to press on. But my brothers and sisters, the challenge is that we must continue to fight the fight, which we have waged here in this courthouse and across the state of Georgia, because the problem with voting, the problem with obstacles, the problem of difficulty in voting is far too common for us to view it as something which seldom happens. Through this court case, we've discovered that it is not something that seldom happens, but far too often happens. And so we must press the fight to see that these obstacles are torn down, that voting is made easier, and that those who are eligible, who have the right to vote, are able to cast their ballot, have their voice heard, and exercise their power. In this case, we are fighting the good fight and won't give up till victory's been won.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers and everyone who has joined us today. If there are any questions for Ms. Lawrence Hardy, we welcome them now. And media who are tuning in via live stream can also follow up with our press shop directly with any follow-up questions.